Good morning, this is Tribal Jazzman Scholar. I want to talk about serendipity. Jungian psychology might call it synchronicity. It's that event that appears in your life in the course of your day that suddenly seems to have relevance to other things that you're doing in your day, in your life. At least that's how I read it and how I interpret it. And I've been very intrigued with the idea that we are living in a time of a great turning. That's a phrase that was coined by Joanna Macy, and Thomas Berry wrote a book in which he also talks about the Great Turning. And the idea behind that is that humanity is at this critical, pivotal moment in which we must make dramatic changes in our collective way of being and seeing and thinking and acting if we are to survive the degradation of the biosphere that has resulted from the Industrial Revolution and from an idea of progress, humanity's idea of industrialization, which wasn't considering environmental impacts. And so now we live in a time when a couple things have happened, and this is Thomas Berry's idea in the Dream of the Earth, where he says the Earth has always controlled its own destiny. The Earth as a sort of biospheric entity, and that animals and species of different kinds come and go, but none of them could impact the longevity and the existence of the Earth itself. But in some strange twist of fate, the Earth has bequeathed to Homo sapiens, to this remarkable species, sentient, articulate, creative species, Homo sapiens. The Earth has given us the capacity to now decide the fate of the Earth. And Thomas Berry calls this sort of a handing over of the reins of the future to this beautiful species, human beings that have populated the Earth and created magnificent works of art and music, and also have explored some of the depths of darkness in our coalitional violence, in our warfare. But the great hope, the great dream of the Earth is that this species, Homo sapiens, will be able to turn around the direction of biospheric degradation, of environmental destruction, and that we will willingly evolve our culture in the direction of greater humanity, equanimity, and equality, and tolerance. And so the great turning is this conception that we are at that pivotal moment, and there's lots of signs and indicators that indeed we are. And I've been intrigued with sort of collecting some of these things, looking at how educational systems have become more egalitarian. Some of that's around child-centeredness, some of it's around respect for diversity issues in schools, the integration of schools, the rights of gays and lesbians in schools. And I've also looked at it in terms of our economic systems. How do we create fair trade? What does that mean? Was that even part of a discussion 30 years ago, 20 years ago? I think about the most obvious being the environmental awareness and consciousness. I mean, it's unheard of in most parts of the United States, at least, for people to litter, whereas that's still practiced in other parts of the world like it was here 50 years ago. But we have this collective sense, no, we don't drop litter. Now, it's a small part of the big puzzle of environmental rehabilitation, but it's an indication that our consciousness around at least the visual aesthetic of our environment doesn't include waste on the ground. So our environmental, our economic, our educational, our healthcare philosophies, our child-rearing practices, in a whole host of areas, the way we conceptualize, labor relations, there's so many areas in which the collective sentiment is much more towards a utopian or an egalitarian way of being. And this is stuff that has happened in the last 20, 30, 40 years at an accelerated rate. If you think that the Bronze Age, 5,000 years ago, was the beginning of a lot of very dominator systems of governance and control and totalitarian, authoritarian ways of dictatorial king monarchies, that we've run the world essentially with an iron fist, and there's been great intolerance that are culturally embedded ideas and collectively carried values that have really left people very marginalized and full of biases and stereotypes and prejudices. Not that we're free from those, but there's a collectivity around the present world that is looking to something else, something more lofty, something more exquisitely kind and altruistic. And that collectivity came to me in a serendipitous moment when I was at a friend's house just a week ago, and she had a book by Paul Hawken called Blessed Unrest, in which he says we are in the presence of a phenomenal movement. And one of his presentations that I watched on the internet, he's talking about how many organizations have sprung up. They have no leadership. They're independent organizations, and they focus on human rights issues, environmental issues, a host of causes which are really about healing the planet. And that he has a screen in which these names of these organizations and the countries that they're in are scrolling by, and he says we'd have to be here for 3, 4, 5 days watching this list because there's perhaps 200,000 of these organizations, and he has already assembled a list of over 150,000 around the world. And he says this is a movement, and he described it as the immune system of the earth is kicking in. And so I myself am an optimistic person. I feel like I've always been that way, but as I work with children now, as a teacher of young people entering at the cusp of adolescence, some of them already crossing in, I can't give them any other message. I'm not willing to, and in fact, that's not how I see it. So I'm sort of compelled in my work to build some kind of an optimism around the ideas that I present. And the last thing I'll say is that we desperately need a new story. A story which says, where did we come from, who are we, and where are we going? And humanity lives in the narrative. People have personal narratives. Who am I? What have I done in my life? Stories about our past that we love to share around the campfire. Exquisite hero journeys we like to relate in which we're one of the characters. And this is a critical feature of the way we live, interact, and be, is that we have stories. And humanity's always had a collective story. At least cultural groups have collective stories. It's what we call the cosmology of a group. And we're at a critical time in that we don't have a shared cosmology right now. But we're trying to build one. We being any number of people who are seeing our own past, our present, and our potential future in a way that moves us towards a hopeful place. So, tribal jazzman scholar, believing in the great turning, in this blessed unrest, and in the forward movement of humanity towards, while not a utopia, certainly a more egalitarian world. And I'm looking forward to being a part of it. I'm already in it, and I'm happy to be able to work with kids and give them that as a direction to move themselves. And they certainly thirst for it. It seems innate to us that we want to move towards goodness in ourselves and in our world. It certainly seems to be the case in those transitional years of early adolescence, and I think that speaks volumes about who we really are. So with Tribal Jazzman Scholar, thanks for joining me.